A lot of parents come to us and they have struggled for so many years with their child's behaviour. And they often ask us, does my child have a condition, a behavioural disorder? I would say in 90% of the cases I found with disruptive behaviour at home, your child doesn't have a behaviour disorder. However, there are going to be some cases out there where your child may have a behaviour disorder. We are actually going to dive into that in this podcast episode. I'm going to go deep on different types of behaviour disorders and give you examples of how they show up in real life, and then hopefully go into some tips on how you can deal with that as a parent. Welcome back to another Warrior Academy podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking all about behavior. Now, so many parents come to us because they want us to help improve their child's behavior, or what we call in the Warrior Academy conduct, one of the 3 C's, as well as confidence and concentration. Now, we've got a track record of improving, on average, each child's conduct by 11% over the year, which for something so challenging is actually quite incredible. Now, a lot of parents come to us and they have struggled for so many years with their child's behavior. And they often ask us, does my child have a condition, a behavioral disorder? And so we are actually going to dive into that in this podcast episode so that you can kind of uncover that for yourself. I would say in 90% of the cases I found with disruptive behavior at home, your child doesn't have a behavior disorder. And in actual fact, they can be fixed very easily just by being very consistent, by implementing certain techniques we use, by having a very good daily habit routine and working together as a team. However, there are going to be some cases out there where your child may have a behavior disorder. So within this episode, I'm going to go deep on different types of behavior disorders and give you examples of how they show up in real life, and then hopefully go into some tips of how you can deal with that as a parent. So let's get started. So I'm going to talk about the most common childhood behavior disorders. First of all children display behavioral difficulties as they grow. That's really natural and actually a necessary part of a child's development. To push back against decisions and express their individuality is a vital part of their development, and that shows up often as disruptive behavior. Children actually come to realize they are their own person over time, and with their own identity, their own feelings, and their own opinions. That's what makes them who they are. And so it's healthy and normal to express these discoveries and essential for their mature development as a person. You can expect that in temper tantrums, in expressed opinions, in disagreements, and bouts of defiance. They're all part of the journey for a young person. So first of all, as a parent, this is what you can expect. But some displayed behaviors leave parents and caregivers feeling dismayed, overwhelmed, and completely helpless. Nothing you do seems to help. And the behavior is so severe and it's so frequent and so long-lasting that it can't be dismissed, and something needs to be done. But nor can it be explained as a normal, through normal childhood development. So when a child's behavior is so disruptive and it's enough to interfere with their everyday life and your everyday life, and it's actually damaging your relationship, nothing seems to help. The behavior is so severe, so frequent, and or so long-lasting that it can't be dismissed. Nor can it be explained as a part of normal childhood development. So when a child's behavior is disruptive enough to interfere with everyday situations or even damage relationships at home or at school, it could be due to a behavioral disorder. So first of all, what is a behavioral disorder? So behavioral disorders in children is essentially, it's a behavior that is extreme or disruptive enough to prohibit healthy, functioning everyday life or everyday life situations. So a child with a behavioral disorder likely has great difficulty with relationships and adhering to the social norms of school and even other societal formalities. The behavior can often worsen over time, and if it's left undiagnosed and unsupported, it does get worse and worse and worse. And so the diagnostic criteria that the disruptive behavior must last for actually at least 6 months. If you've noticed really severe behavior for over 6 months that affects most areas of your child's life, then it may be worth getting them clinically recognized as, a behavior disorder and speaking to a specialist about that. If a child's behavior is inattentive, hyperactive, defiant, or even delinquent in a way that negatively affects their school, home, and social life, it could be due to behavioral disorder. So it's important that professional advice is sought if you're struggling with a child in your care who shows this type of behavior, as the right kind of support and intervention can actually go a long way to manage and improve behavior disorders. So obviously as a parent, it can be quite frightening to acknowledge the reality of your child struggling with their behavior. You may even feel a sense of guilt or shame. Is there something I've done wrong? Am I a bad parent? All these sorts of feelings can arise, but often it's not your fault as a parent. I think many behavior disorders are common, and they're less severe when than they actually sound. When I list these symptoms of a behavior disorder, they sound very extreme, but it's often a case-by-case basis. Your child might have a behavior disorder, but it shows up very differently. But with the right kind of assistance and knowledge, I feel as though you and your youngsters can actually use this, as a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. You can actually grow together by helping nurture them through that behavior disorder. So let's talk about the most common behavior disorders out there. First of all, let's talk about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So ADHD is obviously the most common behavior disorder in children. It actually affects about 11% of school-aged kids. Now, obviously, that's on a spectrum of 0 to 100. It can really widely vary. It's actually a neurodevelopment disorder that's often thought to exclusively affect children. But for 75% of people with ADHD, the symptoms actually continue into adulthood. And it isn't something that a person leaves behind in childhood. It's not a disorder that only children deal with. So, most people are aware of and know someone with an ADHD diagnosis. But what's less known is that there are different types of ADHD based upon a predominance of either inattention, hyperactivity, or a combination of the two. So let's look at the signs of inattentive ADHD. And again, this is useful for you as a parent if you're trying to assess if your child has a behavior disorder. The first is careless mistakes, difficulty focusing, difficulty following instructions, disorganization, avoidance of mentally challenging tasks. They're easily distracted, forgetful, and these things are all signs of inattentive ADHD. Now, when it comes to hyperactive ADHD, it's slightly different. You've got signs like incessant talking, constant movement. They may find it difficult to do quiet activities, or they may be impatient. They may say inappropriate or rash comments or do things without considering the consequences. The next behavior disorder I want to talk about is ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. And that's the name given to behavior that is persistently defiant and disobedient. And again, don't look at this as a one-off situation. It's got to be over several months. It's not the same as a temper tantrum or a child that likes to argue their point. If they've got a strong opinion, that's slightly different. It's the temperament and behavior of a child with ODD that's far more intense and hostile. So between 1 and 16% of school-aged children have ODD, and the symptoms of the disorder, they manifest most often in those situations where compliant behavior is more required, like the school environment or at home. That's when the signs of ODD typically occur. So here's what you can look for. If you think that your child may have ODD and it's a behavior disorder, here's the typical signs. You might experience frequent temper tantrums, frequent arguing with authoritative figures. So again, within those situations where you have an authoritative figure, deliberately antagonizing others, a refusal to follow rules or guidance. Maybe they are unable to take responsibility for actions. They may be easily angered. They may be revengeful. They may have a revengeful behavior. Their conduct, and often, I think it's children with ODD that have a greater risk of experiencing, or they have potentially experienced traumatic life events like child abuse or neglect in the most serious cases. So this is why the statistics say 1 to 16%, but I would say for the most of the children who come to the Warrior Academy, it's actually a lot less. Just a quick shout out to the guys at Shield who manage this podcast, come up with the strategy behind the podcast, help me schedule interviews, as well as do all of the editing and the producing of the podcast. Without them, we wouldn't be able to produce this podcast. If you would like to create your own podcast, I can't recommend the Shield team enough. They have done well over 100 episodes for me over the last few years, and I've been so pleased with the results. So have a look in the description of this video or the podcast episode, and you'll see how to get in touch with them yourself. So the next behavior disorder I want to talk about is conduct disorder. So children with conduct disorder are often viewed as bad, when in fact they're often victims. So they're suffering with a mental illness, and that needs to be cared for as much as any other type of illness. And that often can be quite difficult to approach as a parent. So conduct disorder, as the name suggests, is this inability to behave in a socially accepted and respectful manner. And there is this repeated lack of empathy and respect for others and for property. And so when we look at the signs of conduct disorder, there's physical aggression towards people, towards animals, and towards their environment, which then shows up as destruction and vandalism of property in a lot of cases. There's stealing, there's breaking the rules, both laws and at home and at school when they're younger. There's deceitfulness and lying. There's mistrust of adults, misuse of drugs or alcohol. The next behavior disorder I want to talk about is IED. This is intermittent explosive disorder. It's a lesser known childhood mental illness and is actually recognized by frequent acts of violent and destructive behavior. So these behaviors are very extreme and they are often out of proportion to the circumstances and the aggression. It's all blown out of proportion. So it's often very impulsive and always very damaging. So IED it's a less studied and understood than the other common behavioral problems from the research we've done, and it's therefore a lot less well recognized and managed, I would say. But certain signs of IED are irritability, racing thoughts, high energy, tantrums and argumentative, physical fights, even threats of violence, assault on people, on property, damage to property and so on. So these are the sort of signs you can expect with IED. Again, a more extreme behavior disorder. So as a parent, what can we do to manage these behavioral disorders? Obviously, they're quite complex, and I've shared some very different disorders. So I really feel like the more we understand the causes of childhood behavioral disorders, the better we can manage the symptoms and therefore relieve the difficulties experienced. Treatment is often multifaceted. So using a combination of medication, of therapy, and re-education, in addition to these approaches, there's other things we can do as well. There are other management techniques that actually parents can utilize. And they can be used not only to relieve the symptoms, but actually provide connections and life skills. So I always say, whenever we're developing a child's character, the difficult things they go through can actually become their strengths. Going through a behavioral disorder with your child and teaching them so many skills to overcome it, or coping mechanisms with something like ADHD, then goes on to serve them as an adult, right? So don't always look at this as this is a disaster. Look at this as an opportunity to grow with your child. I think that when young people are equipped to handle the emotions that surface in healthy ways, they're better able to deal with the ups and downs of life. And all that we know as parents is that our children are going to go through difficult things. All we can do as parents is empower them with management techniques. So other management techniques for childhood behavior disorders include providing a nutritious and well-balanced diet. It's incredible what an impact our diet has on our mood and therefore our behavior. Having at least 60 minutes of physical exercise every single day, brilliant habits cement from an early age as we grow up into adults. Having plenty of good quality sleep and really designing their room and their environment to improve their sleep. Reducing their screen time is a massive one as well. But as with all mental health problems, partaking in activities that calm the mind and body are super effective at relieving those symptoms and managing the illness. So you can look at things like yoga, like meditation, time in nature, and focused movements such as martial arts. They're all there to help to steady an overactive or chaotic mindset. And that's why we've built meditation into the daily habits for our Warrior Academy students. If you've ever gone through the character development program with us, you'll understand that meditation, sitting still with our eyes closed for 1 minute, is actually a part of the daily habit routine. And it's amazing the impact this can then have on their behavior, as well as their focus and concentration and anxiety. If you're a parent, you're listening to this and you're worried about your child going through a difficult bout of, behavior, and you're worried if they've got a behavior disorder, I really hope that this information helps you and it doesn't overwhelm you. There is so much you can do to help your child. It's not the end of the world if they are, going through a difficult time with their behavior. You can help them and you can help grow with them through the experience. I know there was a lot to take in there. I really hope that it gives you an opportunity to kind of self-diagnose and decide whether or not your child is just going through a difficult time. Going through a difficult time can be influenced by so many things in their school or at home or whatever it is. Or if you actually got a concern, they've got a behavior disorder, in which case it's a good idea to now seek professional expert advice to get a diagnosis so that you can help support them more. Like I've always said at the beginning of this podcast, so many parents come to us with the concern their child has a behavior disorder. 90% of the time they don't, and it's just this simple daily habit routine, being consistent as a parent and working together as a team, both the parents and you're working with the instructors at the Warrior Academy. You can make a rapid change and improvement in your child's conduct and behavior. So I really hope you enjoyed this podcast all about behavior, and if you have, don't forget to hit subscribe on the podcast, like and follow and subscribe on the YouTube channel as well, so you don't miss an episode. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. I really hope you enjoyed today's Warrior Academy podcast episode. We're going to keep creating these episodes because I know that so many parents find them useful or get insights or get ideas about how to develop their child's character. But it all comes down to the 3 C's: confidence, conduct, and concentration. So if you want to get a deep insight into the levels of confidence your child has, the level of concentration they have, or the level of conduct they have, so that you can actually put a score next to it and then work towards increasing those scores like we do in the Warrior Academy, then I'd love to invite you to fill in the Breakthrough Area Assessment. It takes about 5 minutes of your time, and you will get a personalized PDF report on your child's 3 C's. To access the Breakthrough Area Assessment and find out your child's 3 C's score, all you need to do is go to www.breakthrougharea.com.